So you want to learn how to train away your pain. Well, we are wrapping up the Beat Chronic Pain series today, and we're going to go through some really practical stuff. You guys have no clue what you're in for. This is going to be epic. It's coming up right now. Okay guys, if this is the first time you have rolled with us, allow me to introduce us. I am Yani Baumeister, together with Richie behind the camera and my brother Rad up on one of the other monitor screens up there. We are the founders of Unity Gym and the UMS system. Now, if you want to know how we turn people into superhumans, you can. We give away all our best stuff for free. Go to www.unitygym.com, scroll down to the bottom of any page and you'll see our free resources section. You can get our strength, flexibility, or nutrition blueprints. They're fantastic downloads and it's all free. Now, to my right here, some of you may know him as Phil. Some of you may know him as Dr. Phil. I like to say I know him as just the world's best looking physiotherapist. We are together diving deep today into some incredible content. This is really going to be, I reckon, one of the shows of the year, because what we're dealing with here and what we're going to share.
Early to be peaking, Yanni.
I know. And we've got some good guests coming up too, man. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us today. But honestly, like I had a discussion with a member yesterday, one of our first ever tribe member at Unity Gym, who's been with us for over 5 years, 66 years old, and we were doing muscle up drills, and we had a really good conversation on this topic about some pain that he was still experiencing from an injury that was about 12 months ago that he did it, doing muscle ups, and it was like so poignant to what we've been talking about over the last couple of days, and even more relevant to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I think if you think about, like anyone who's done any amount of training, you've probably experienced injuries and pain over the time. And the one thing that the people who get trained injured even more than those who don't train are those who don't do any injuries. They get so many niggly issues, so much back pain. It's just it's just a really common experience. That's why I think this series has been so valuable, I hope, to everyone, and definitely give you some things to think about. But today, it's not just thinking, it's doing. So we're getting into the real practical side of how you do go and approach a training program when you do have limiting pain.
Yep, absolutely, and it's exciting. I think this is stuff that anyone and everyone is going to injure themselves at some point if they're training in the gym regularly or doing any sort of sport regularly.
Or you'll have someone who's just really opening up to you about how much they're struggling, and now you can be like, hey, I can help you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So. Exactly right. And I'll be honest, like some of the stuff that I spoke about yesterday with our tribe member here was refreshed on what we've been talking about now, and so I could come at a very high level, and it was really liberating for the two of us, because he got to go through the workout and really overcame, had a breakthrough in himself, at that moment, which is really cool to see and be a part of.
Yeah.
All right, let's dive in. We had some really good engagement over this the course of this show too, so we are going to cover some questions that have come through. And again, I'm going to plug the crap out of it because Phil has done so much work to get it going. If you haven't already, please jump over on your favourite podcasting app and give us a 5-star kick-ass review. You don't have to actually write anything. You can just hit that 5-star on the Sound of Movement podcast. We've actually rebranded it as the Sound of Movement, the Unity Gym podcast, which is pretty cool.
To make it easier to find. Yeah,
that's right.
Speaking of easy to find, there was a link in the description that I've now edited for this video, and I'll go back and edit for the other ones, where it seems if you do the HTTPS thing at the beginning of www.soundofmovement.com, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I'm not taking enough to understand why, so I'm just going to go through and delete it all.
It's been explained to me why, but I don't know why that is. So there's basically two types of internet, and one type of internet needs HTTP. Now, hello to all of you on the podcast listening right now. I just wanted to say that, and I think we should say that.
Yeah, now I'm going to have to edit your volume down for yelling into the mic.
I moved back a little bit.
This is the kind of stuff I have to do to make this podcast.
I think we should start acknowledging anyone who's listening on the podcast, because we are getting people listening on the podcast, which is really cool.
There's someone listening in Slovakia. I was stoked.
I know, it's really cool.
Stuff.
Really cool.
Anyway, I think a really good place to start this, and just to get the discussion going, but also because I really want to make sure I can help this person and give some really good stuff for Graham Ricketts here, who said, really hoping to learn where to start with this and how to form a simple strategy for someone who suffers chronic pain. That's exactly what we're going to do today. Love it. He says, I have a relative who suffers SI joint pain. Lack of movement and physical activity has left the joint hypermobile, in my opinion, perhaps due to muscular atrophy. And they regularly have to see a chiropractor to realign this. One possible step apparently is fix the joint with screws. But this series has made me think that there is further avenues to explore first. Range of motion is pretty good, but if they do too much, which isn't very much at all, it can cause pain for hours or even days. I would love to be able to spark some hope for them and say, we've got something new to try. That in itself can create some energy, which can build hope and some momentum. Living without hope is very, very hard. Thanks, guys. So,
I haven't heard of hypermobile SI joint before. That's quite fascinating to me because it's such a sort of fixed, like your pelvis is kind of, you think of your pelvis as one thing, but it isn't. It's two different. There's a sacroiliac joint there. Is that common?
Well, so the thing is that it's become it's one of those things that people love to point to as like,
the source of all pain.
Yeah, the source
sacroiliac
of all
joint.
issues is like you got
it's kind of like the piriformis.
Yeah,
if you had a bone structure that was on par with the piriformis, and surprisingly they're in the same sort of area of the body, then the sacroiliac or SI joint is like that's the bone.
If you haven't heard us rant about the piriformis before, it's just the scapegoat for all
problems. In the lower extremities. Yeah, that's right.
So basically, hypermobile, like people having unstable pelvises was this like real old school thing that people were thinking that you had to do all these special exercises, get adjustments, and which doesn't make sense to me. If you're getting adjustments for something that's hypermobile, that doesn't sort of make sense to me. But anyway, it was a big thing that people were like blaming for all issues. But if you look at a pelvis and SI joint, there's been lots of people responding to this hypermobile SI joint and saying like, no, that is absolutely ridiculous. It's such a stable joint for good reason. But anyway, just for Graham in particular, I think what we'll talk about today will give some definitely sort of spark some of that hope about simple practical things of where to start. But what I would love you to do is send me a message, or I'll message you with a particular podcast link to one of my favorite physio podcasts where the physio actually has he does discussions with patients sometimes, and this patient was on track to be an Olympic swimmer, and then had an issue which was then blamed on as a hypermobile SI joint, and she ended up getting screws and all sorts of stuff, like missed out on having a swimming career, was in chronic pain for like her whole life, and now she's trained to be a physio assistant and is like a total advocate against all this stuff because she figured out how to look after herself. So yeah, there's definitely some hope there. You'll be I'll send that through. But
absolutely, and I can say with absolute certainty that even coming from quite a serious injury, spinal injury, and that sort of thing, there is nothing better than getting strong and flexible. It just makes you so much more robust, and it is a slower process. If you've had an injury in the past, you have to take it a little bit more progressively. I mean, my opinion is that exercise, and this is something we're running a workshop tomorrow. We do our fast growth workshop as part of our new year, a 28-day intensive, when people come into the gym that are new. And one of the key principles that we drive home, we want them to leave with 3 key principles. The first one is that exercises don't hurt people. The pursuit of intensity hurts people. Or I'll say again, excess intensity hurts people. And we talk about this a lot all the time. You need to grease the groove, you need to lay down the foundations, you need to allow your body to fully and appropriately adapt to exercise. And it means that it has to be a progressive approach.
As I've said so many times now, parental injuries come down to load management issues. So if you can kind of pick that right load where to start, and then have a clear path of where you're going, then that's a great start. But what we're going to be talking about today as well is that you can kind of make a plan, pick a trajectory that you hope, even if you go for a real gradual thing. But the reality of pain is you generally won't get like an improvement that just keeps going up and up in a really linear fashion. One way it was explained to me is it's kind of more like looking at the stock market. You might have like crashes here and there, but as long as you're seeing that sort of positive trend overall, if you would draw a line of trend, it can be like certain days where you feel like, it's all for nothing, and I've gone, I'm worse than when I started. But if you look at that trend line over time, that it's improving. So,
yep, absolutely. All right, so let's hit with a basic structure of the thesis of today, the theory, which you explained to me before, which I just think is so valuable.
Yeah, so pacing is what it's called. Pacing is what we get taught as like kind of the big kind of approach that you use with people who are suffering chronic pain.
Can I just stop first, because there's one thing that needs to be addressed before that, which is the difference between pain and injury.
Yeah.
And the concept of being able to sort of separate those two and go, okay, so at the point of injury, they're both usually aligned quite appropriately, but after a period of time, the tissues have had plenty of time to heal.
Yeah.
Irrespective of what sort of pain you're experiencing, at that point, you need to actually disassociate the two and differentiate the two. Is
so
that
what
right?
kind of Yani's talking about there is that in the first episode we talked about the all the pain science, and if you haven't watched that episode, I really recommend that you do, or listen to it on the podcast. But in that, I was talking about with when you get stimulus from your body that is then through your brain experienced as a pain response. When the stimulus matches the response, that's totally appropriate, and you know to be in pain is to be human, and it's a really helpful thing that your brain's trying to do to get you to stop doing whatever it is that just injured you or cause that injury. That's a real life-saving thing for humans. But the issue is when over time, if you start to kind of have a stimulus that is no longer having a accurate response due to hypersensitivity, which can be sort of physiological, so like inflammatory conditions or metabolic derangement, hormonal derangement. All these things can turn up and turn down the pain signal, as I talked about before, in the at the spinal cord level, and then in your brain, your thoughts, moods, and beliefs can then turn up and turn down that signal, which may then have you experience that stimulus as pain. So I know it's kind of full on to hear about it just that quickly in that sort of scientific terms, but if you go back to the episode at the beginning of the week,
episode 1 of this series,
Yep. Then
Pain
hopefully,
Science Explained, it was titled.
Yeah. So when you kind of understand that, like after you've had an injury, that you have like a stimulus that matches that response of pain, over time, if you think like as long as you've kind of done your either way, your body is going to heal itself. So you have tissue healing times that again, I've talked about this quite a lot, but muscles, usually by 3 months you're pretty safe that muscles have sort of knitted up and healed. Your other tissues like your bones, joint, cartilage, ligaments, those can take a bit longer. But sort of from that 6 month mark, like you can be pretty sort of sure that your structures have healed. So now it's that pain is no longer representing damage, but rather that pain is usually a hypersensitivity issue, which is wrapped up in all of those things that I talked about before in the Pain Science Explained.
Yeah, that's right. And so then, from that point on, how does pacing come into it, and what are the most important things for people to understand through that process?
The big thing about pacing is you're trying to remove pain as the main thing that is guiding your training. So a lot of the time, people sort of say like, let pain be your guide, which can be really helpful in that sort of acute phase that I've talked about. But when you get to that point where you're like, okay, there's no longer tissue damage here, but I've got this hypersensitive nervous system. If you're getting to certain thresholds and pain is saying like, oh, that's enough, stop there, then you're never going to go like, Yani has talked so much about progressive overload over time. It's impossible to overload if you're getting to that threshold, which you normally get to, and then you back off because pain is stopping you. So you'll only decondition rather than get stronger. So pacing is all about trying to disconnect pain being your feedback, and rather using time as your main feedback, or sets, reps, other variables that aren't related to the pain.
Yep. Perfect.
So the practical way you go about this is you kind of think about your, you find your baseline. So finding your baseline, if you're someone like Graham Ricketts, his relative there, it might be to the point that, even going for a 10-minute walk might be kind of the max that they can do. So finding your
the max that they can do based on the pain that they can take.
Their pain that they can tolerate, and then they're like, no, this is doing me damage, I'm going to stop, or I just can't handle this. And so you go up to that 10, you kind of do 3 different tests for your baseline. So you go in, because, day by day things can really vary. You find the average of those to find your baseline. For them, we found that the baseline is about 10 minutes. And then what you do is you start with 80%, so times that whatever time or reps or whatever by 0.8, and then start from there. That's where you're starting.
So let's just
So-
absolutely simplify this. So let's say we're using Graham as an example because he's one of the people that we've used his history as an example here. Let's say hypothetically that Graham can only tolerate 10 minutes of walking, and then his pain in his sacroiliac joint becomes too unbearable. He's going to times that by 0.8 and get an 8-minute benchmark, and that's going to be his starting point. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the benchmark is the 10 minutes. Is like we know that 10 minutes is when you get sore.
8 minutes
which
is
we
the
found
goal.
after 3 different benchmark tests, and then we're starting with 8 minutes, and we're going to get 8 minutes whether or not it's sore, because day by day it can fluctuate, but you're going to go for an 8-minute walk, like no matter what.
Yep.
And then from there you're just increasing 10% per week.
Yep.
So if it's 8 minutes the first time, then you're going to increase it by another 10%, another 10%, and you're going above that initial benchmark, and that might be really challenging for people. They might find like, hey, this is more than I've done for a long time. I know that I'm going to get flared up from this, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But what you're trying to do is really disconnect that association or stimulus with that pain experience.
So let's flip this to a gym workout, and let's say hypothetically that I have a forearm or a bicep injury, and it is aggravating when I do things like pull-ups or bicep curls. And we know that it's been 6 to 12 months since the initial acute injury has occurred, and we're now very confident that it's healed. So we're going to set a benchmark based on volume this time.
Yeah, it might be. Well, it might be intensity. You might find like, hey, I can do as many reps as I like of a bicep curl, for example. But as soon as I try and get past that 12.5 kilo dumbbell, it really hurts. Yeah.
Yep.
So this is kind of getting into I think elbow is a challenging one because often like a tendinopathy issue is a bit different to a chronic pain issue.
Yep.
But let's just use an example of like if you've had a elbow surgery or something like that, and it's not a tendinopathy, because again, that's a different sort of approach. Well, similar, actually quite a similar approach, but slightly different. So yeah, using that kind of more like chronic pain example.
Yep.
So
then what we do is, let's say we test, and it's for absolute ease of numbers. The tolerance is up to 10 kilo dumbbell curl. After that, anything over 10 kilos, it starts to really, really hurt to a degree that we can't really handle. We're going to times that 10 kilo dumbbell by 0.8, and we get an 8 kilo workout, and that becomes the goal. So the benchmark after 3 workouts, we may have got a few variances. One might have been 9 kilos, one might have been 10, one might have been 11. We're going to take an average of that and go with 10 as the benchmark. Times 0.8, we get our 8 kilo. So from a practical standpoint, we start our workouts at 8 kilos, and then we increase by 10% each workout.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like that is an example. I think it would be somewhat unusual, as I said. And the kind of classic one is around the sort of aerobic stuff. So yeah, when you bring it into the gym space, like that would be the type of approach you'd take. And you just have to be a bit sort of, again, with all this stuff, we're trying to give you information about what you can be, the questions you can be asking, and the things that you could expect if you go and work with someone who really specializes in pain. So by all means, definitely give it a go yourself. But it definitely helps to have someone who's really sort of fine tuning things depending on your what you're up to.
And I think that probably one of the if I could just pause and step out of where we are and reinforce again. The one of the key take homes from this, because I always like to say that there's a lot of psychological research that will indicate that you won't take everything that we're talking about away, and you might take 1 or 2 or maximum 3 points. So one of those key points I'd like to reinforce is that once the tissues have had time to heal, and we're suggesting that it's usually around 6 months, up to maybe in extreme cases like at my knee reconstruction, they sort of said 6 to 9 months is when you can start really loading it again. Then it's about not using pain as the indicator again. And at this point, you'll be surprised to know that training through pain is actually quite important. It's actually a really, really important part of the process, because you're going to be getting a stimulus that does not align with the amount of tissue damage anymore. In many cases, the tissue damage is no longer there, but you're still getting a stimulus. Oh, good. We've got an alarm going off outside. Apologies for that. So that's really important to understand, because a lot of people will say, well, I still get a lot of pain when I do the workout. And that's what we're talking about here, We want to make sure that you understand that it's not, that the pain is no longer, after that point in time, pain is no longer the best measure to sort of dictate whether you should or shouldn't exercise. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, that's what it's all about. It's like kind of getting these positive associations with your brain where you're, because it's really building up. I mean, it might not always be positive for you if it's hurting, but it's kind of bringing that control back to you and not letting pain dominate you and control your actions.
And from a personal standpoint, the thing that I can remember the most, I've had 2 very serious injuries in the last 5 years. 6 years, one that required a knee reconstruction and one that required essentially an ankle reconstruction. And anyone who's had surgical intervention on something to fix an area of the body that's had quite a severe injury will be able to relate to this. When you're going through your rehab, you're often forced to train through pain when the physiotherapist is working with you in the hospital, and it's really quite confronting, because you've got a lot of trauma around that, and you've been programmed to believe that pain is not a good thing, and it's something that is indicating that you should not move that limb. But you'll often have to push through the pain, and that's sort of what we're talking about here. There does come a time when pain is no longer serving you. It's no longer warning you of imminent danger. It's just needing to be overridden and toned down.
There's one thing that's really like a huge part of pacing is goal setting around it. So with pacing, like a formal part of it is actually sitting down and putting together SMART goals. And if you're not sure about SMART goals, then go back 2 weeks and go through the shows there, because Yani goes deep into goal setting. But having this this goal is so important, because so often it's like the people who are really suffering in this, it's been a long-term thing, and it is really like can kind of beat you down. It
becomes your identity, which we've spoken about,
and
the concept of an injury identity, and this is. Yeah, it's so important that you overcome that, because it's no way to live.
And one way I kind of explain to people as well and think about it is that, like, I guess people who are in this kind of pain, like, nothing has helped and they're still in pain. So, like, kind of you might as well give it a go. If you're going to be in pain, kind of regardless, like, I guess just trying to figure out ways you can kind of get that sort of hope. It's like, well, if I'm going to be in pain, even if I just go walk to the shops, then let's try something where you're really building up the structures. And as I've talked about so much, there is like a, when you're talking about your active structures that support your joints, and load is what stimulates your tissue healing and your bone mineral density increasing, your ligaments increasing, all of these things. Like, there's so many known benefits as well as metabolic and hormonal benefits to exercise that, like, there's just like understanding just how many systems this is affecting and how positive it can be. It's a reason to, even if there is a bit of pain there, to train through it and work to those kind of time goals. The other things that are really helpful when you're working through a pacing program is to think about, like, if you find like bending over, lifting or carrying, certain things like that are really challenging, then in the gym, if you're trying those things, then you go home and you've decided you're going to do like a spring cleaning day and you're going to do like all your cleaning on one day, then kind of having that awareness around like, oh, okay, I'm using time as my sort of feedback, but then on some days you've just got all these like extra sort of duties that end up doing
extra workouts.
Yeah.
You're loading the area. Just because it's not in the gym doesn't mean you're not working the area, so you got to take that into consideration.
Yeah, so working with a professional who can like really identify those aggravating factors, but then can also highlight some easing factors, things that you can do for yourself to settle down the pain that are either movement based or things that you can do for yourself, not going in and getting treatment. Having these, like, this big sort of bucket of things that when you do your training session, you kind of make yourself a bit sore, and that's okay. But having things that you can do that aren't medications that aren't whatevers to help kind of get that control and decrease some of that pain is really key. So
awesome. So before we dive into some more questions, who have we got here? Cracked glasses. How can I stay positive experiencing pain throughout the day and not be anxious and depressed? I'll answer that because I'm a very firm believer that living with purpose will overcome that depression and anxiety. And the easiest way to live with purpose, my friend, if you are suffering chronic pain, is to have an action plan and be moving forwards through that action plan. Because if even, progress is the key to happiness for human beings. So as long as you can see that you're making some form of progress, it will have a dramatic impact on your psychology. So the first step to answering that question is to get together with a professional like Phil who can help you put together an action plan, and then you just focus on the day-to-days of that action plan and see that progress unfold. That's going to completely change your psychology.
Yeah, and I think, I guess, how do you stay positive experience pain? I think it's really hard to be positive when you're experiencing pain, when you feel powerless and when you are feeling like, oh, it doesn't matter what I do, like, if I'm even just sitting here or whatever, like, if that's really painful. But I think obviously, it's hard to tell people like, oh, just feel better, like, I'm not saying that. But if you are doing things that and have been you're like strength training or getting out there and doing aerobic training that have really positive benefits to your body, and you're experiencing pain throughout there, then I think it's kind of a bit easier to feel like, oh, okay, sure, I'm still in pain, as I just did say before, but I think it's easier to stay positive when you're like, hey, it hurts, but I'm heading in a right direction. But when you really get depressed and anxious about your future is when you don't see a path forward, when you feel like, oh, I'm not getting anywhere.
You can't see any light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly,
and this is, I think, this goes back to very much our goal setting series. If the pain is the sort of outcome. It's the thing that is there at the end of the day. And no one ever achieves a lot of success by focusing on the outcome alone. You got to focus on the process goals, which would be ticking off your exercise sessions, ticking off your workouts, ticking off every time you have a meal that's in alignment with your health goals, and getting your body, your inflammation lowered and all that sort of stuff. So, come at it from a macro program, which is not just exercise. Exercise and daily movement is going to be one component. How much sleep you get is going to be another component. If I was to work with someone on this level, then it would be like a 5-stage process. It would be exercise, nutrition, recovery. It would be the remedial therapies that you're working with. So every single time you go through and tick a box related to any of these areas, you're making progress, and that progress is what starts to have a compounding effect on your happiness. And it really is about focusing on the processes and not the outcome or the end of day discomfort that you're feeling, and that will really, really help.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope that makes sense. Okay, so do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I just the thing is, like, if you find, say if it's walking, if that flares up your back or whatever. Thinking one really important thing with pacing is also breaking things into little frequent chunks as well. So just trying to it might be in your strength training, might be whatever, like understanding with your baseline if it's sort of usually things like accumulate. If you can do little frequent things, then you can accumulate a little bit, have a rest, accumulate a little bit, have a rest. So that's a way of just getting around some of the real big flare ups. And if you do have a flare up where you really can't handle it. We're not saying like go out there and just keep crawling along the ground like with tears in your eyes until because you should be getting better. Yeah. If you do have a big flare up like that, go back to the stage before the flare up, spend some time there, work through that, and then build it up again. So like it's a tricky one. That's why it's really helpful working with especially like someone who's trained in this, especially the people who really are trained particularly in pain science and chronic pain. If you really are having issues, but yeah, so important to have that plan and know what the next step forward is.
Yeah. And to give you an example from a practical example, after my knee reconstruction, I had to do 10 10-minute workouts a day. and I couldn't do them all backed up because it would just get too intense, the discomfort. And so it started off very, very basic, but just little doses of stimulus, but spread out throughout the day. And then slowly those doses of stimulus started to come together into one big workout over time. But it was spread out over a 9-month period that occurred, you know. So it's just to give you an example of what Phil's talking about there. Okay.
Yeah. Crash glasses, I'd love to hear if what we were talking about there to help you sort of make sense, and we'll just have a look at some other questions. If you could let us know, or if you have any other questions, and we'll get back to you before we wrap this one up. So did you want to have a quick look at some of the...
Yeah, let's have a look at some of the other questions that have come through overnight. By the way, hats off to Graham Ricketts. You are basically getting like an extreme level of, not personal training, but physio and all of that put together, because you're so good at asking questions.
It's someone that Graham cares about. It's not him himself. It's a
that's
family
right.
member. So it's really nice that you're going out of your way to try and figure out ways in which you can help them. And if you do want to know more, then Graham definitely just send me a personal message, and I'll get back to you on that.
Very quickly with Andy Lawson here. Brother, the link was incorrect in the previous video, so Phil's going to go through and click that. But if you search the Sound of Movement podcast, it should come up. I find it in Google, and it comes up every time. So I don't know what's going on there, but just make sure that it's the anchor link that you're, like the page that you're on, not the old Liberated syndication one, which was an old trial that we did a couple of years ago. What have we got here?
No, I think that's crash glasses. Yes, it does. Thanks. That's glad to hear it. Yeah, and with that, anxiety and depression. Remember, with depression, it's usually about stuff that's happened in the past. And so, if you've had the ability to do all these things in the past, and you feel like you can't do that anymore, then with your pacing, again, it's so important with your goals to think about things that you actually want to be doing, things that you want to get back to. So with your pacing, really make it something that you enjoy doing and makes you feel like yourself. And then, I guess with that anxiety, as we talked about, the anxiousness, it's all about your future. So having these clear steps that you can take with your pacing, which will help you get back to what you want to do, I think that should hopefully really go away as to help your outlook.
Mike Ruiz has asked, first of all, thank you very much for sharing that you're enjoying this series. He's interested in finding out a little bit more about Rad's recovery from a meniscus tear. He's currently suffering. He's had a meniscus tear and would love to know exactly what you did to recover. Mike, I'll help you out with this because Rad isn't on the show today, and you've probably got the best person out of the three of us to talk to. One thing that is an absolute certainty is that there is, I think, about 6 different types of meniscus tear if you categorise them, and the recovery is very different for each of them, and the intervention can vary quite a lot depending on what type of tear you've got.
Yeah, for most of them, it doesn't, for a lot of them can be treated fairly similarly. It's the big one is that bucket handle where if you're getting clicking and blocking of movement, that's where you start to really have to change your management there. Yeah,
that's right. What I do know as a general consensus is that once you've had a decent meniscal tear, loaded flexion in the knee is something that can aggravate it and make it worse, because the problem with the meniscus, and Phil can chime in here and probably correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't get a lot of blood flow, so it's kind of hard to heal. You get a little bit of blood flow around the outside of the meniscus or the inside of the meniscus, but it's not getting
just
that
the outside,
much.
Really.
Just the outside, yeah. And so, once you've kind of got a decent meniscal tear, it generally sort of stays like that. And so you just have to slightly alter what you're doing. It doesn't mean that you stop doing anything. Like Rad still does everything. I've had quite a bad meniscus tear with my soccer injury, and they trimmed a bit of it off to sort of prevent it from getting worse when I had my surgery. But I still do pretty much everything, and I think that the priority should be that you really focus on keeping the muscles around the knee and the muscles that support and move the knee really nice and strong and robust. And that may mean that you have to limit the depth of your squat and things like that, but it doesn't mean that you can't squat. You know?
100%. Not only, definitely the muscles around your knee are so important, as I talked about before, so much with active and passive structures. Active structures being your muscles that provide that dynamic stability, really key around the knee. So your calves and your quads and your hamstrings, your adductors. everything, but also really keep in mind that your knee is basically a hinge between your ankle and your hip. So it's going to be very much at the whims of, how well your hip is stabilizing and how well your ankle is stabilizing. So if you find that maybe you've done a lot of ankle injuries in the past and you've got pretty poor proprioception and pretty poor ankle stability, then that's a really good place to start, is working on that. And also your hip, whenever you squat down on one leg, if your hip, you get that kind of contralateral hip drop, your knees dipping into that sort of valgus position. All of these things are just going to mean that instead of lining up the meniscus to be compressed equally, if you start to compress more on one side, if you think about how like whenever you decrease surface area, the amount of pressure going through a smaller surface area is going to really increase. So if you've got meniscus challenge, then from those sort of positions, then really getting quite clear on your knee tracking, your ankle and hip stability, building up those muscles, and that kind of movement pattern is going to be key to help you keep moving while not aggravating your knee itself.
Yep. That's and to be specific to Rad, which I wanted to share, the main thing that really aggravated his knee was a specific stretch. I'm pretty sure it was related to his FAI in the hip, and it was an internal rotation stretch of the hip, and he just basically cut that out. There was not a lot of need or necessity for it. He was just benchmarking himself against people who could do it, and once he found out that there was sort of a bony structure that was making it harder for him to hit that goal with that stretch, he just said, "Oh, we'll stuff it. I don't need to be pushing that." So he removed that. And we do a lot of, from a global or a macro standpoint, we train barefoot pretty much every time, except for when we're doing heavy squatting. We use squat shoes, and we really like that because it's for that proprioceptive reasons that Phil just spoke about. And so, if I was helping you with your exercise programming, I'd be prioritizing building really strong calves. I'd be prioritizing building really strong glutes. I'd be prioritizing building those global muscles, as so long as you're not feeling pain in that meniscus, and if you do, then restricting the amount of flexion that you experience in the knee.
Yeah, that's getting those global movement, like those big movement patterns right. And then the other thing was, I've forgotten.
One good hack while he's trying to remember.
Pain-free range. Pain-free range.
Pain-free range.
Like,
that's what I should have said.
Yeah, in the acute phase, while you've just had this meniscus issue, and it's getting aggravated if you do go into those. It's usually that deep flexion, or sometimes it can be right up into end range extension as well. Then definitely strengthening up in that pain-free available range. So you might get down to 90 degrees and then come back up and not totally lock out, then that's a great way to be strengthening all the muscles around it without having to aggravate things.
And I've helped work with a professional skier who had both knees really severely injured like that. And initially when we started with her, she couldn't even do concentric or eccentric flexion in the knee loaded. So we were working just in the initial term with isometric contractions like ski squat positions against walls and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's always somewhere you can start.
Yeah, that's
which
exactly
is
right.
Such a good message for the pacing as well. Like, there's always something you can be doing that can have that next step forward and the next step forward.
Yeah, that's right.
For pacing, I really recommend, if you're interested in it, there's so many good free templates made by universities and government agencies that I guess give people help with the pacing. So if you are interested in if someone who needs a bit of help, or you are yourself going through this, go on to Google, look up pain pacing, and have a look out for some university or government links that have PDFs or some more information.
I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I think we can bring this one in for a landing, nice and easy.
That's pain.
That's pain. Yeah,
that's it.
That's pain science done. So that's a wrap for this series, guys. I am excited to have been able to put that together, because Rad and I would never have been able to do that without Phil. So I'd like to thank you for coming together with all of that great knowledge. And we're going to keep this going. We've got some really epic guests coming up on the show. We've got some pretty cool stuff going. And as of next week, I think we're going to kick off the weekly workouts for the year, which are going to be on the channel again, which is going to be freaking awesome, because they seem to be the videos that we get the most amount of of engagement and likes from. So I hope you guys are as excited as we are at producing them again. And we're going to start that off. Are we doing forearm tendinopathy?
Yeah, so I think next week, unless anyone is like desperate to learn about something else, I'm thinking of starting kind of broad with tendinopathy and then going into the different regions that are affected the most. And I know that
like knees, most forearms, Achilles, and even some shoulder.
Yeah. So I know that a lot of the people who are probably watching this are on the calisthenics and bodyweight side of things, so it's probably going to be big for the forearms. So, but yeah, that's the plan. If anyone wants something else, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And in Australia right now, it is the weekend. Now, I wanted to do one thing before we wrap up, and that is to introduce Phil's new Death Star laptop. So please hold that up to the camera so the audience can see. We didn't get an unpacking on the show, but it still is pretty sexy. I thought that my MacBook Pro was the most awesome, but Phil's new... it's even more of a beast than my MacBook Pro.
I'm such a sucker for marketing that I went for one which is a content creator, because I'm a content creator now. So it's an MSI content creator laptop.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is exciting because what I'm really hoping for this year is I'm setting up my business. Is like a large part of my business is trying to help more than just the people in the gym. So the big things that I'm really working on is getting my online consultation set up, and then also similar to these guys, how they put out videos and resources. I'd love to give
Phil's going to blow up the online physiotherapist space, so look out, watch this space. It's going to be awesome. I'm genuinely looking forward. How good does that laptop look? How good does that look? We get a 20-second delay here, so we're seeing our little confidence screen come up now, and it's just all amazing. Anyway, guys, it is the weekend, as I was just about to say, here now. So we are going to we got workshops all weekend, and we're doing some renos here. We're going to be busy, but for everyone else, have a fantastic weekend in Australia. Enjoy Friday for all you Americans, and we will see you.
One last little thing, which I did mention yesterday, is that I'm kind of excited about, and I'd love for someone to be the first message on our podcast platform, but on if you go into the description of the episode, there's a little link at the bottom which tells you how to send in a message to us via Anchor, which will open up a little recording screen in your browser, and you just hit the red button and talk to us. And I'd love to get some messages via the podcast.
Cool, yeah, because then we'll play them here and answer them on the podcast. Yeah, so many of the podcasts that I listen to do that, and I didn't know how they did that, and now I know.
We have the technology.
There you go. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a fantastic weekend. We will see you next week. We're working through, if no one else chimes in and asks for anything else, we're going to be working on tendinopathy. See you soon. Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, it's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that far.
It's the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.